Numbers don't lie. That's what I'd always told myself during my 2 years as a forensic accountant. Spreadsheets revealed truths that people tried to hide. Patterns emerged from chaos, and every transaction left a trail. I'd built my career on that certainty, on the cold logic of debits and credits that made sense when nothing else did. But standing in my bathroom at 6 a.m, staring at the positive pregnancy test I'd taken 3 weeks ago and hidden in the back of a drawer, I understood that some truths couldn't be organized into neat columns. Some secrets grew heavier with each passing day until they became impossible to carry alone. 5 months. I was just past 5 months pregnant, and no one knew. The father was a stranger whose name I couldn't remember from a conference in Chicago about 6 months ago. One night of too much wine and not enough judgment, and now I was hiding my expanding stomach under increasingly creative wardrobe choices while trying to maintain the illusion that my life was perfectly under control. I pulled on a charcoal blazer over my loose-fitting olive dress, the kind of combination I'd been relying on for weeks. High waists, forgiving fabrics, anything that blurred the new curve at my midsection. Oversized layers and strategic tailoring had become armor, disguising the slow betrayal of my own body. In the mirror, the effects still passed for professional. A tired junior associate who lived on coffee and late nights. People saw what they expected to see. Only I knew how carefully I'd learned to angle my shoulders, to keep my laptop bag or coat between me and anyone who might look too closely. How I chose conference tables and restaurant seating based on what they could hide. My makeup did what it could to brighten dull skin, but it couldn't do much about the way pregnancy had softened some lines while stress carved new shadows beneath my green eyes. My phone buzzed with a reminder about today's meeting. The Versiani audit. I'd been working on it for 3 weeks, and every document I reviewed made my unease grow. Christopher Versiani's import business had the kind of financial patterns that made experienced accountants nervous. Legitimate transactions mixed with irregularities that suggested something darker underneath. I grabbed my laptop bag and headed out, leaving my small apartment behind. The building was old, but clean, located in a neighborhood that straddled the line between affordable and acceptable. 3 years ago, when I'd moved here after the falling out with my sister Haley, it had felt like independence. Now, it just felt lonely. The firm's offices occupied 3 floors of a glass tower downtown. I took the elevator to the 15th floor, nodding to colleagues who barely glanced up from their phones. Anonymity had its advantages. No one asked questions about my weight gain or why I'd stopped joining happy hours. I was just Olivia Grant, the quiet accountant who did excellent work and kept to herself. My desk sat in a corner near the windows, surrounded by stacks of files and 2 monitors displaying endless rows of numbers. I settled into my chair carefully, mindful of the pressure on my lower back that had become constant over the past month. "Morning, Olivia." My supervisor, Robert Hayes, appeared beside my desk with a coffee in hand. He was 50-something, balding, and perpetually worried about client retention. "How's the Versiani audit coming?" "I'm finding some inconsistencies in the international transactions," I said, pulling up the spreadsheet I'd been working on. "The volume doesn't match the shipping manifests, and there are regular payments to shell companies in the Cayman Islands." Robert's expression tightened. "Be very careful with this one. Versiani is an important client." "Important or dangerous?" "Both." He lowered his voice. "Just document everything thoroughly and keep me informed before you make any conclusions official." After he walked away, I returned to the numbers, letting them absorb my attention. For 3 hours, I tracked money through layers of corporate structures, identifying patterns that suggested money laundering. It was elegant work, whoever had set it up. Almost elegant enough to hide the truth. Almost. My phone rang just before noon. Unknown number. I answered out of habit. "Olivia Grant." "Miss Grant, this is James from Mr. Versiani's office. He'd like to meet with you this afternoon to discuss the audit." Would 2 o'clock work? My stomach tightened. Clients didn't usually request face-to-face meetings during preliminary audits. I typically coordinate through my supervisor. "Mr. Versiani specifically requested you. He's reviewed your credentials and wants to discuss the findings directly." I glanced at Robert's empty office. 2 o'clock is fine. "Should I come to your location?" "Mr. Versiani will come to you. Conference room B." The call ended before I could respond. I sat back, feeling the baby shift inside me. Braxton Hicks contractions had started last week, irregular tightenings that my online research assured me were normal. But stress made them worse, and this meeting was definitely going to be stressful. I spent the next 2 hours reviewing my notes, making sure every conclusion was supported by documentation. Whatever Christopher Versiani wanted, I wouldn't be caught unprepared. At 1:55, I gathered my files and headed to conference room B. It was one of the smaller rooms, with a table for 6 and windows overlooking the city. I arranged my documents and opened my laptop, then poured myself water from the pitcher on the side table. The door opened at exactly 2 o'clock. Christopher Versiani was not what I expected. The financial profiles I'd reviewed suggested someone older, harder. But the man who entered was maybe 34 or 35, tall with dark hair swept back from a face that could have belonged to a Renaissance painting. Sharp jaw, dark brown eyes that seemed to catalog everything in a single glance. Expensive charcoal suit that fit like it had been made specifically for his frame. 2 men followed him into the room, both broad-shouldered and watchful. Security, clearly. They took positions by the door while Versiani approached the table. "Miss Grant." His voice was smooth, cultured, with the barest hint of an Italian accent. "Thank you for meeting with me." I stood to shake his hand, acutely aware of how my blazer hung strategically loose. "Mr. Versiani, I should mention that my supervisor typically handles client consultations. I'm aware of standard protocol." He settled into the chair across from me with casual grace. "But I prefer direct communication when it comes to matters of financial complexity." Up close, his presence was almost overwhelming. Not threatening exactly, but intensely focused. When he looked at me, it felt like he was seeing through every carefully constructed defense I'd built. "I've reviewed your preliminary findings," he continued, pulling out a tablet. "You've identified irregularities in my international transactions." "Several irregularities," I corrected, opening my laptop. "The volume of reported imports doesn't match the documented shipping weights. The payments to subsidiary companies in tax havens don't correspond with any services I can identify, and the art acquisitions are being valued significantly above market rates. You're very thorough. It's my job to be thorough." One corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been amusement. "And what conclusions are you drawing from these irregularities?" I met his gaze directly. "That your business has legitimate operations mixed with financial structures designed to move money without proper documentation. Whether that constitutes illegal activity isn't my determination to make. I document the patterns. Others decide what they mean. Others like the SEC or the FBI. Or simply the IRS if there are tax implications." He leaned back, studying me with those unsettling dark eyes. "You're not intimidated. Should I be? Most people are, when they realize what they're investigating." A contraction rippled across my abdomen, sudden and sharp. I reached for my water glass, using the movement to hide the momentary tension. When I looked up, Versiani's expression had shifted. Not suspicion exactly, but heightened attention. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Fine. Just a cramp." I set the glass down carefully. "Can we continue?" He studied me for another moment, then nodded. "Walk me through your methodology." For the next hour, we discussed financial structures and international transactions. Versiani was sharp, catching details most clients would miss, asking questions that revealed a sophisticated understanding of both legitimate business and the gray areas where legality blurred. He didn't deny the irregularities. Instead, he offered alternative explanations, some plausible, some clearly designed to test how much I actually knew. Throughout it all, I maintained professional detachment, presenting facts without judgment, but I was acutely aware of how his attention never wavered, how he noticed when I shifted in my chair to ease the pressure on my back, how his gaze lingered on my face, as if trying to decipher something hidden. Finally, he closed his tablet. "You're good at what you do, Miss Grant." "Thank you. How long have you worked for this firm?" 2 years. "And before that?" "Graduate school." "University of Chicago, Forensic Accounting Specialization." "Chicago." Something flickered across his expression. "When did you graduate?" 18 months ago. Why? Just curious about your background. He stood, buttoning his jacket. I'll want weekly updates on your audit. Direct communication, if that's acceptable to you. It wasn't a request, despite the polite phrasing. I'll coordinate with my supervisor. I've already discussed it with Robert. He's agreed that you'll handle my account directly. Of course he had. Robert wouldn't refuse someone like Christopher Versiani. Then I'll prepare weekly reports, I said. Versiani extended his hand again. When I shook it, his grip was firm, warm, and held a fraction longer than necessary. I look forward to working with you, Miss Grant. I have a feeling this will be an interesting professional relationship. After he left, I remained in the conference room, processing what had just happened. Everything about the meeting felt calculated, from the timing to the direct request for my involvement. Christopher Versiani was testing me, gauging whether I could be intimidated, influenced, or bought. The answer to all three was no. But I also understood, with uncomfortable clarity, that I'd just stepped into something far more complicated than a routine audit. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Next meeting, Thursday, 4 p.m. I'll send the location. CV. I stared at the message, then at the contact information he'd somehow obtained without asking. This was a man who got what he wanted, who operated with the kind of power that made rules optional. And for the next several weeks, I'd be working directly with him, hiding a pregnancy that was becoming harder to disguise while investigating financial structures that suggested criminal activity. I closed my laptop and returned to my desk, where the baby kicked firmly against my ribs. 7 months pregnant. Alone in a city where my closest relationship was with a sister I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. Working for a client who might be exactly the kind of dangerous my instincts warned me about. But I'd survived worse. I'd built a career on my ability to see patterns others missed, to maintain control when everything felt chaotic. I could manage this. I would manage this. I just had to keep the secret for 8 more weeks. After that, I'd disappear before anyone connected the dots. Before Christopher Versiani's dark eyes noticed what I'd been hiding under those carefully chosen blazers. Before I had to admit that somewhere between graduate school and single motherhood, I'd lost the ability to ask for help, even when I desperately needed it. 3 weeks slipped by faster than I'd anticipated. 3 weeks of weekly meetings with Christopher Versiani, each one lasting longer than the previous, each one revealing more about the man behind the carefully constructed business empire. Thursday afternoons became routine. He'd arrive at the conference room precisely on time, always impeccably dressed in suits that whispered wealth rather than shouted it. We'd discuss transaction patterns, shell companies, and the intricate web of international transfers that characterized his operations. But increasingly, the conversations drifted beyond pure business. You studied at the University of Chicago, he said during our 4th meeting, leaning back in his chair with an espresso he'd brought from some Italian place I couldn't afford. What made you choose forensic accounting? I kept my eyes on my laptop screen, tracking a series of payments to an art gallery in Milan. I wanted work that mattered. Regular accounting felt too abstract. This way, I can actually expose wrongdoing. Interesting choice of words. Expose. His tone was neutral, but I felt the weight of it. Does that make me wrongdoing that needs exposing? That depends on what I find in your records. You've already found irregularities. You documented them in your 2nd report. Irregularities aren't necessarily crimes. They're just patterns that require explanation. He took a sip of his espresso, studying me over the rim of the cup. You're diplomatic. Most auditors would have already filed a suspicious activity report. I'm thorough, not diplomatic. I don't make conclusions without complete evidence. A valuable quality. He set down the cup. Tell me about your background. Where did you grow up? The personal question caught me off guard. Small town in Ohio, nothing interesting. Family? A sister. The words came out more clipped than intended. We're not close. That's unfortunate. Family should be important. I looked up from my laptop, meeting his gaze directly. Mr. Versiani, I appreciate that these meetings have become more conversational, but my personal life isn't relevant to your audit. Something flickered in those dark eyes. Not offense, but something closer to interest. Fair enough, Miss Grant. Let's discuss the Milan Gallery payments. We spent the next hour dissecting art acquisitions that were valued significantly above market rates. Christopher explained each purchase with details that suggested genuine knowledge about Renaissance paintings and contemporary sculpture. Either he was an actual art enthusiast, or he'd done extensive homework to create a plausible cover story. I suspected both. After he left, I remained in the conference room, staring at the spreadsheets that told a story of money moving through legitimate channels that occasionally fed into darker tributaries. My supervisor, Robert, had stopped asking detailed questions about the audit's progress, which told me everything I needed to know. The firm didn't want to look too closely at Christopher Versiani's operations. That evening, I had my monthly prenatal appointment at a clinic 30 minutes from my apartment. I'd chosen the location specifically for its distance from work, paying cash for services that should have been covered by insurance. But insurance left paper trails, and paper trails meant questions I wasn't ready to answer. Dr. Sarah Whitfield was in her 40s, efficient and kind without being overly curious. She'd accepted my explanation about wanting privacy without pressing for details. 7.5 months, she said, measuring my belly. Baby's measuring right on track. Have you thought about birth plans? Not yet. The truth was, I'd thought about little else. Where would I deliver? How would I explain the sudden absence from work? What would I tell people about the father? You should start preparing. These last weeks go quickly. Dr. Whitfield typed notes into her laptop. Any unusual symptoms? Contractions? Bleeding? Excessive swelling? Some Braxton Hicks contractions. Especially when I'm stressed. That's normal, but try to manage stress levels when possible. Your blood pressure is slightly elevated today. I nodded, knowing that managing stress was impossible when I was investigating a potential criminal while hiding a pregnancy from everyone I knew. After the appointment, I stopped at a pharmacy 2 towns over to pick up prenatal vitamins. I was standing in the supplement aisle, comparing brands, when I felt it. That prickling sensation of being watched. I turned slowly, scanning the store. A man in a dark jacket stood near the magazine rack, seemingly absorbed in a sports publication. But something about his posture was wrong. Too alert, too focused. I paid quickly and left, checking my mirrors constantly during the drive home. The dark sedan that had been 3 cars back when I left the pharmacy was still there when I turned onto my street. By the time I parked, my heart was racing. I sat in my car, watching through the rearview mirror as the sedan drove past without slowing. Maybe I was paranoid. Maybe the stress was making me see threats that didn't exist. But forensic accountants were trained to recognize patterns. And this felt like surveillance. The next day, Christopher arrived for our meeting with a companion. The man was large, probably 6'3", with the build of someone who'd spent years in physical confrontations. He stood by the door while Christopher settled into his usual chair. "This is Marco," Christopher said casually. "My head of security. He'll be joining our meetings from now on." I glanced at Marco, then back to Christopher. "Is there a security concern I should know about?" "General precaution. My business has attracted some unwanted attention lately." "From whom?" Christopher opened his tablet, pulling up documents. "A rival organization. Nothing that affects you directly, but I'm implementing enhanced security protocols across all my operations." "Including auditors?" "Including everyone associated with my business interests." I wanted to ask more, to understand what kind of rival warranted a bodyguard's presence at financial meetings. But Robert's warnings echoed in my mind. Be careful with this client. We worked through the latest transactions, Marco a silent presence that made the small conference room feel even smaller. Halfway through, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Black sedan. Following you for 3 days. Will handle. CV." Ice flooded my veins. I looked up at Christopher, who was watching me with that unnervingly focused gaze. "Something wrong?" he asked. "How long have you been having me followed?" He didn't deny it. "Since our second meeting. Marco noticed someone conducting surveillance on you. We investigated. You investigated my life without permission. I investigated a threat to someone working on my account. The surveillance wasn't from my organization." "Then who?" Christopher exchanged a glance with Marco before answering. "The O'Sullivan family. They're Irish-American, control significant territory in this city. We've been in conflict over business interest for several years. What does that have to do with me?" They're investigating everyone associated with my operations. Accountants, lawyers, suppliers. They're looking for weaknesses, for information they can leverage. I set down my pen, suddenly aware of how much danger I'd stumbled into. You should have told me this from the beginning. Would you have continued the audit if I had? No, exactly. He leaned forward slightly. Miss Grant, I understand your concern, but the surveillance has been handled. Marco's team identified the O'Sullivan operatives and made it clear that harassing my accountant was unacceptable. Made it clear how. Through channels they understand. The careful phrasing told me everything. Violence had been implied, possibly delivered, and I was the cause, simply by doing my job. I want to transfer this audit to another accountant, I said. Robert has already confirmed you'll complete the engagement. It would be suspicious to change auditors mid-process. The O'Sullivans would interpret it as evidence that you'd found something incriminating. He was right, which made the situation worse. I was trapped by the very thoroughness that had made me good at my job. What exactly is your conflict with the O'Sullivan family about? I asked. Christopher was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much truth to share. Territory. They control certain smuggling routes through the port. They wanted me to use my legitimate import business to transport their contraband. I refused. The refusal cost me several warehouses and 3 employees. Cost you how? They were killed, Miss Grant. That's how conflicts are resolved in this particular business. The blunt admission should have sent me running. Instead, I found myself calculating. If Christopher was telling the truth about refusing to participate in smuggling, it suggested he maintained some ethical boundaries. That was more than I'd expected from someone operating partially outside the law. I'll need security, I said finally. If I'm continuing this audit, I need to know I'm protected. Already arranged. Marco has assigned 2 of his team to discreet surveillance. You won't see them, but they'll be close. I don't want armed guards following me everywhere. They're professionals. You'll never know they're there unless you're in danger. I wanted to protest further, but a contraction rippled across my stomach. I reached for my water glass, using the movement to hide the momentary tension. When I looked up, both Christopher and Marco were watching me with expressions I couldn't quite read. Are you sure you're all right? Christopher asked. You've had several moments of discomfort during our meetings. I'm fine. Stress-related stomach issues. You should see a doctor. I have. The lie came easily. It's nothing serious. He didn't look convinced, but he let it drop. We finished reviewing the documents, and he left with Marco, leaving me alone in the conference room with the weight of new knowledge. I was caught between organized crime factions, investigating a man who admitted to violence while claiming to have ethical lines, and hiding a pregnancy that was becoming harder to conceal with each passing week. That night, I stood in my bathroom staring at my reflection. The blazers weren't hiding my stomach as well anymore. Soon, very soon, someone would notice. And when they did, questions would follow. Questions about the father, about why I'd hidden it, about my fitness to continue working. I needed a plan. 8 more weeks until my due date. 8 weeks to finish the Versiani audit, collect my final paycheck, and disappear before anyone connected the dots. But as I placed my hand on my belly, feeling the baby move beneath my palm, I wondered if disappearing was even possible anymore. Christopher Versiani had eyes everywhere. He'd discovered surveillance I hadn't noticed. He'd sent security without asking permission. What else did he know? What else had he seen that I thought was hidden? The questions followed me to bed, where I lay awake, calculating probabilities and risks, trying to find a path through the increasingly complex maze my life had become. Numbers had always made sense, but people, particularly dangerous people with dark eyes and protective instincts I didn't understand, operated according to different mathematics entirely. The meeting was supposed to end at 6. Christopher had scheduled it for late evening, ostensibly to review quarterly statements away from the distractions of normal business hours. But when I arrived at his corporate offices, a sleek building in the financial district, something felt wrong. The lobby was too quiet. The security guard at the desk looked up sharply when I entered, spoke briefly into his radio, then waved me toward the elevators without the usual visitor badge protocol. Christopher's office occupied the entire top floor. I'd never been here before, Our previous meetings had always taken place at my firm's conference rooms, neutral territory, where I felt some measure of control. Being in his space shifted the dynamic in ways I couldn't quite define. The elevator opened directly into a reception area decorated in minimalist modern style. Dark wood, leather seating, abstract art that probably cost more than my annual salary. A woman in her 50s sat at the reception desk, her expression professional but warm. "Miss Grant? Mr. Versiani is expecting you. Conference room 2, down the hall to your left." I followed her directions, my low heels clicking against polished marble. The hallway was lined with windows overlooking the city, lights beginning to sparkle as dusk settled. At the end, double doors stood slightly ajar. I pushed them open and stopped. The conference room was massive, dominated by a table that could seat 20. But what caught my attention was the scene unfolding beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows on the opposite wall. The building's parking garage was visible 3 floors below, and I could see 2 distinct groups of men facing each other in what was clearly a confrontation. Christopher stood at the window, hands in his pockets, watching the scene with Marco beside him. "Miss Grant." He didn't turn around. "I apologize for the irregular meeting location. Circumstances have become complicated. What's happening down there?" "A business discussion that's becoming less civil than I'd prefer." He finally turned, and I saw tension in the set of his shoulders. "The O'Sullivan family has decided that polite warnings are insufficient." As if to punctuate his words, I watched one of the men below shove another. The group surged together, and even from this distance, I could see the violence erupting. "We should call the police," I said. Marco laughed, a short, bitter sound. "The police won't come in time. Not for this." "What do you mean?" Christopher moved away from the window, gesturing for me to sit at the conference table. "Sit down, Miss Grant. There's something you need to understand about the situation you've inadvertently become part of." I remained standing. "I'm an accountant. I audit financial records. I'm not part of anything. You became part of it the moment you started investigating my transactions with sufficient competence to draw attention." He pulled out a chair, sitting down himself. "Please, this will be easier if you're seated." Against my better judgment, I sat, keeping the table between us. "The O'Sullivan family controls significant criminal operations in this city," Christopher began. "Smuggling, primarily. They use legitimate import businesses as covers, forcing owners to transport contraband alongside legal goods. 3 years ago, they approached me with that same proposition. And you refused." I refused. My father built his business on actual imports, legitimate trade. When he died, I inherited both the company and a choice about its future. I chose to maintain the legitimate operations while phasing out the questionable transactions he'd been involved in. I thought about the audit findings, the patterns I'd identified, the shell companies in the Cayman Islands, the art acquisitions, remnants of my father's operations. I've been systematically closing those channels, redirecting capital into fully legal ventures. It's a slow process when you're trying not to attract regulatory attention during the transition. So you're claiming you're actually cleaning up your business. I'm claiming exactly that. But the O'Sullivans see my refusal to cooperate as an insult and a threat. If I can operate profitably without their smuggling routes, it suggests others could do the same. That undermines their entire model. A crash from below drew my attention back to the window. The fight had escalated. I could see someone on the ground. "This is insane," I said. "People are being hurt down there. 3 people have been killed in the past 6 months over this conflict." Christopher said quietly. 2 of mine, 1 of theirs. This is what happens when territories are disputed in our world. I don't want to be part of your world. Neither did the 2 accountants who worked for companies that accepted O'Sullivan's terms. Both are now complicit in smuggling operations, trapped by knowledge they can't unknow, and evidence that implicates them if they try to leave. His meaning was clear. "You're saying that if I'd been working for someone else, I'd be compromised by now. Or dead, if you'd tried to report what you found." He leaned forward slightly. "Miss Grant, Olivia, you need to understand the reality of this situation. You've documented irregularities in my accounts that could be interpreted multiple ways. The O'Sullivans want those documents because they believe you found evidence of criminal operations they can use as leverage. They think they can force you to testify against me, or to provide intelligence about my financial structures. Can't you just give them what they want, end the conflict, and participate in human trafficking, drug smuggling, and weapons transport? No. I won't build my life on that foundation. There was conviction in his voice that surprised me. I'd assumed Christopher Versiani was simply another criminal with a better public relations strategy, but if he was telling the truth about transitioning away from illegal operations, it complicated everything. What does this have to do with tonight's meeting? I asked. The confrontation below is because I discovered O'Sullivan's people planning to intercept you in the parking garage of your office building. They intended to abduct you, question you about the audit findings, and use you as leverage against me. Ice spread through my chest. They were going to kidnap me? Marco's team intervened before the plan could be executed. What you're watching is the aftermath of that intervention. I stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. This is crazy. I'm calling the police, reporting all of this. And telling them what? That you're investigating a legitimate businessman who's being harassed by criminal rivals? That you have suspicions but no proof of actual crimes? That you're afraid of being kidnapped based on intelligence from the target of your audit? He was right. Everything about this was too tangled, too complicated to explain to authorities who'd want clear victims and obvious criminals. I'm quitting, I said. I'll tell Robert to assign the audit to someone else. I'll transfer to a different department. I'll leave the city if I have to. Leaving won't make you less valuable to the O'Sullivans. You've already seen enough documents to be useful to them. And changing auditors mid-investigation would signal that you found something significant, which would make them even more determined to acquire you. So what am I supposed to do? Christopher stood, moving around the table toward me. I backed up instinctively, but he stopped several feet away, respecting the distance. Accept protection. Temporarily. Until this conflict resolves. And how long will that take? I don't know. Weeks, possibly months. But Marco's team is the best private security in the city. They can keep you safe. I wanted to refuse. Accepting protection from the subject of my audit was about as ethically compromised as I could get. But the alternative was becoming a target for a criminal organization that had already killed multiple people over this territory dispute. I need time to think, I said. Time is something you don't have much of. Christopher nodded toward the window. Below, the confrontation was breaking up, both groups retreating to separate vehicles. The O'Sullivans now know we're aware of their plans. They'll accelerate their timeline. A contraction rippled across my stomach, stress-induced and sharp. I pressed my hand against my abdomen, trying to breathe through it. You're in pain, Christopher observed. This is the 4th time I've noticed you having physical distress during our meetings. It's nothing. Stress. Have you seen a doctor about these stress symptoms? Yes, it's being managed. He looked like he wanted to press further, but Marco appeared in the doorway. Boss, we need to move. O'Sullivan's people are regrouping. Christopher turned back to me. Marco will drive you home. There will be a security team watching your building tonight. Tomorrow we'll discuss longer-term arrangements. I didn't agree to this. You didn't refuse either. His dark eyes held mine. Miss Grant, I understand you value your independence. But independence is meaningless if you're dead or imprisoned by people who'll use you as a bargaining chip. Let me protect you while we navigate this situation. Another contraction. Stronger this time. I gripped the back of the chair for support, trying to keep my expression neutral. Fine. Just for tonight. Marco led me to a private elevator that bypassed the main lobby. The parking garage was clear now, though I could see broken glass and what might have been blood on the concrete. We got into a black SUV with tinted windows, Marco behind the wheel, another man I didn't recognize riding in the passenger seat. The drive to my apartment took 30 minutes through evening traffic. Neither man spoke except for occasional radio communications in code I didn't understand. When we arrived, Marco walked me to my door. There'll be a team in a vehicle across the street, he said. Shift changes every 8 hours. If you need anything, if you see anything unusual, call this number. He handed me a card with a single phone number printed on it. This is insane, I said. This is survival. He waited until I'd unlocked my door and stepped inside. Lock it. Don't open it for anyone except delivery drivers you're expecting. And even then, verify through the peephole first. After he left, I stood in my dark apartment shaking. The enormity of what I'd stumbled into was overwhelming. I wasn't just auditing a complicated business. I'd become a piece in a violent territorial dispute between criminal organizations. I went to my window and looked down at the street. A dark sedan was parked across from my building, exactly as Marco had said. 2 figures visible in the front seats. My phone buzzed. "Christopher, are you safely inside?" "Yes." "Good. Try to rest. We'll talk tomorrow about next steps." "There's something you should know." I wasn't sure why I was about to tell him. Maybe because the day had stripped away all my careful defenses. "I can't be put in danger. I have reasons why I need to avoid any situations that might become violent or require extensive legal involvement." There was a pause. "What kind of reasons?" "Personal ones. I just need you to understand that I can't be compromised in certain ways." "Noted. Is there anything else you're not telling me, Miss Grant? Anything that would affect security protocols?" "Everything. I'm 7.5 months pregnant with a stranger's child, and I've been hiding it from everyone, including you. And if this situation forces me into hospitals or police stations, or anywhere with official documentation, people will find out." "No," I said. "Nothing else. Then get some rest. I'll have Marco pick you up at 9 tomorrow. We'll meet somewhere secure and develop a comprehensive plan." After he hung up, I stood at my window for a long time, watching the security team watch my building. I'd spent months trying to remain invisible, to keep my pregnancy secret until I could disappear with my secrets intact. But Christopher Versiani saw everything. Sooner or later, he'd see through this lie too. And when he did, I had no idea what would happen to the fragile safety net I was being forced to accept. Working from home under constant surveillance was surreal. I could see the security team's vehicle parked across the street whenever I looked out my window. Knowing they were there should have made me feel safer. But instead, it felt like being watched from 2 sides, protected from external threats while being monitored by the very people providing that protection. Marco picked me up at 9 the next morning, as Christopher had promised. The drive took us out of the city, winding through increasingly affluent neighborhoods until we reached a gated property surrounded by high walls and mature trees. "Where are we?" I asked, as Marco punched in a code at the gate. "One of Mr. Verciani's properties. More secure than meeting in the city." The gate swung open, revealing a driveway that curved through landscaped grounds. The house itself was modern but not ostentatious, all clean lines and large windows. Security cameras were visible at regular intervals, and I spotted at least 2 guards patrolling the perimeter. Christopher met us at the entrance, dressed more casually than I'd ever seen him. Dark jeans, a black sweater, no tie. It made him look younger, more approachable, and somehow more dangerous. Stripped of the formal business armor. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing for me to follow him inside. I thought neutral territory would be better for this conversation. Somewhere we both feel less constrained by professional boundaries. The interior was surprisingly warm. Hardwood floors, comfortable furniture that looked actually lived in rather than designer selected. We walked through a spacious living area to what appeared to be his private study, lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large desk near windows overlooking a garden. A woman in her 50s appeared with a tray containing coffee and pastries. She smiled at me kindly as she set it down. "This is Anna," Christopher said. "She manages this property. If you need anything while you're here, just ask her." "Thank you," I said, though the idea of needing anything suggested I'd be here longer than a single meeting. After Anna left, Christopher poured coffee for both of us. "How was your night?" "Sleepless. I kept thinking about those men in the parking garage, about what almost happened. Marco's team prevented what almost happened. That's what matters. For now. But you said this conflict could last months." I wrapped my hands around the coffee cup, seeking its warmth. "I can't live under constant guard for months. I have responsibilities, commitments, which is why we need to discuss temporary arrangements." He settled into the chair across from me, his posture relaxed, but his attention completely focused. "The safest option is for you to stay here, at this property, until the situation stabilizes." "Absolutely not. Let me explain before you refuse. This house has comprehensive security. Guards, cameras, perimeter alarms. It's 15 minutes outside the city, which makes surveillance from O'Sullivan's people significantly more difficult. You'd have your own suite, complete privacy, and you could continue working remotely on the audit. You're suggesting I move into your home. Into a guest house on my property. There's a separate entrance, full kitchen, private space. Anna stays here full-time and can assist with anything you need. This is insane. I have an apartment, a life. You have an apartment that O'Sullivan's people now know the location of, and a life that's currently at risk. He leaned forward slightly. Miss Grant, I understand this feels invasive, but consider the alternative. Either you accept secure accommodation temporarily, or you remain in your apartment with round-the-clock obvious security that will announce to everyone that you're a person of interest in a criminal conflict. He was right, which made my refusal more difficult. I need to think about this. Of course. But think quickly. Every day you remain at your current address increases the risk. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Robert, my supervisor. I answered, stepping away slightly. Olivia, where are you? You missed the morning meeting. I'd completely forgotten about the weekly team briefing. I'm working off-site today. Client meeting. The Versiani audit? Robert's voice carried concern. I need to speak with you about that. Can you come in this afternoon? I'll be there by 2. After I hung up, Christopher was watching me. Problems at work? My supervisor wants to meet, probably about the audit. What will you tell him? The truth. That your accounts show irregularities that require further investigation, but that I haven't found conclusive evidence of criminal activity. And if he asks about our meeting frequency, I'll say you're a demanding client who insists on regular updates. I met his gaze directly. I'm not going to lie about the audit findings, if that's what you're worried about. I'm not worried about the audit. I know what you'll find because I know what's actually in those accounts. I'm worried about your safety if the firm decides to distance itself from a complicated client. That possibility hadn't occurred to me. You think they'd drop your account? I think Robert is smart enough to recognize when a client relationship is creating problems. If he decides the risk isn't worth the fees, you'll lose whatever protection my association provides. Your association is what created the danger in the first place. No, your competence created the danger. If you'd done a superficial audit and missed the key transactions, the O'Sullivans wouldn't have noticed you. But you're thorough, and that thoroughness made you valuable. The baby kicked suddenly, a sharp jab against my ribs. I pressed my hand against my side, trying to ease the discomfort without drawing attention. You're in pain again, Christopher observed. These stress reactions are becoming more frequent. I'm fine. You keep saying that, but your body is clearly telling you otherwise. He stood, moving to a cabinet against the wall. I have contacts with excellent private physicians. Discreet, experienced. Let me arrange for someone to examine you. No, thank you, but no. Why not? If you're having stress-related symptoms severe enough to cause physical pain, you should have medical evaluation, because any doctor would immediately recognize that I'm 7.5 months pregnant, and then all of this carefully constructed secrecy would collapse. I have my own doctor, I said. I'll make an appointment. He studied me for a long moment, and I had the uncomfortable feeling he knew I was lying, but he didn't press further. At least eat something. You barely touched breakfast. I picked up one of the pastries, more to end the conversation than from actual hunger. It was excellent, flaky, and filled with cheese, but I could only manage a few bites before my stomach protested. Morning sickness had mostly passed, but stress brought it back with a vengeance. Tell me about your business, I said, changing the subject. The legitimate parts. If I'm going to be working with you, I should understand what you're actually trying to build. Christopher returned to his chair, seeming relieved by the shift to safer territory. My father started with wine imports from Italy. His family owned vineyards in Tuscany, and he saw an opportunity to bring quality wines to American restaurants at competitive prices. The business grew, expanded into other Italian products. Olive oil, cheese, furniture, art, and somewhere along the way, the legitimate business provided cover for less legitimate transactions. My father believed in pragmatism. When certain organizations offered opportunities to increase profits through their distribution channels, he accepted. By the time I inherited the business, those relationships were deeply embedded. But you're trying to extract yourself. I'm trying to build something that doesn't require looking over my shoulder, that doesn't put employees at risk or force moral compromises. He paused. My mother died when I was 15. Cancer. My father threw himself into the business, made decisions he probably wouldn't have made otherwise. He died 3 years ago, and I inherited his choices along with his company. There was pain in his voice when he mentioned his mother, humanizing him in ways I'd been trying to avoid. It was easier to think of Christopher Verciani as simply a criminal target of my audit, not as someone who'd lost his parents and was trying to navigate impossible situations. I'm sorry about your mother, I said quietly. Thank you. She would have liked you, I think. She valued competence and honesty. I'm not sure she'd approve of her son holding an accountant captive to discuss protection arrangements. You're not captive. You're free to leave anytime. Am I? Because it feels like every option that doesn't involve accepting your help leads to danger. That's not manipulation. That's reality. He stood, moving to the window. I didn't create this situation, Olivia. The O'Sullivans did when they decided to target anyone associated with my businesses. I'm simply offering you the best protection available while we resolve it. The use of my first name instead of the formal Miss Grant didn't escape my notice. We were crossing boundaries, shifting from purely professional territory into something more personal, dangerous territory, given how many secrets I was still keeping. I need to get back to the city for my meeting with Robert, I said. Can Marco drive me? Of course. But think about what I've offered. The guest house, the security, the protected space to work without fear. You don't have to decide today, but decide soon. Marco drove me back to the firm, dropping me at the entrance. I went straight to Robert's office, where he was waiting with an expression that combined concern and frustration. Sit down, Olivia. We need to discuss the Verciani situation. I sat, my professional mask firmly in place. What about it? I've received some information about Christopher Verciani that concerns me. Information suggesting his business dealings may be more complicated than a standard audit can handle. What kind of information? The kind that comes from federal investigators who are interested in his operations. The kind that suggests we should consider withdrawing from the engagement before our firm becomes entangled in whatever they're investigating. My stomach dropped. The FBI contacted you? Not officially, but word travels in certain circles. Verciani is on multiple agencies' radar. If we continue auditing his accounts, we may end up being called to testify about our findings. Isn't that the point of forensic accounting? To document financial irregularities that may be criminal? Yes, when we're hired specifically for that purpose. But we were engaged for a standard corporate audit. This has evolved into something else. Robert leaned back in his chair. I'm considering recommending to the partners that we withdraw. It would mean returning the fees already paid and potentially losing a significant client, but it protects the firm from complications. What about protecting me? If you withdraw, the O'Sullivan organization will interpret it as evidence that I found something damaging. They'll intensify their attempts to access my findings. Robert's expression shifted. How do you know about the O'Sullivans? Because they've been following me. Because they tried to arrange a situation where they could question me about the audit. Because Christopher Verciani had to assign private security to prevent my kidnapping. Jesus. Robert ran his hand through his thinning hair. This is worse than I thought. You should have told me immediately when you became aware of external threats. I'm telling you now, and I'm saying that withdrawing from the engagement will make things worse, not better. Then what do you suggest? Let me finish the audit. Give me 2 more weeks to complete my analysis and deliver a final report. Then the engagement ends naturally, without raising suspicions about what I found. Robert considered this. 2 weeks. But you work from home, maintain minimal contact with the client, and you document everything. If anything escalates, we go to the authorities immediately. Agreed. After leaving his office, I returned to my desk and stared at the spreadsheets that had caused so much trouble. Numbers that should have been simple truth had instead revealed a world of complications I wasn't equipped to handle. My phone buzzed with a text from Christopher. How did your meeting go? The firm is nervous. They're considering withdrawal. I can speak with Robert, provide assurances. No, that would make it worse. Let me handle this professionally, as you wish. But the offer stands. Protection, accommodation, security. When you're ready. I spent the rest of the afternoon working on the audit, documenting the legitimate transactions I'd verified, and flagging the questionable ones that remained unresolved. If I only had 2 weeks to finish, I needed to focus on completing the analysis rather than investigating every irregularity. By 5, my lower back was aching, and the baby was unusually active, pressing against my ribs in ways that made breathing difficult. I packed up my laptop and headed for the elevator, planning to go straight home and collapse. The parking garage was mostly empty at this hour. My car was on the 3rd level, in a corner spot I'd chosen that morning for its proximity to the exit. I was halfway there when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. 3 men emerged from between parked cars, positioning themselves to cut off my exit route. Not security, not Marco's team. The way they moved, the cold calculation in their approach, marked them as exactly what Christopher had warned me about. O'Sullivan's people had found me. Marco's team appeared from behind a support column before the men could reach me. 4 against 3, and Marco's people moved with professional efficiency that suggested military training. The confrontation was brief and violent, ending with O'Sullivan's men retreating toward the stairwell. One of Marco's security team, a woman with short dark hair and calculating eyes, approached me. "Miss Grant, are you hurt?" "No. What just happened?" Attempted contact. They wanted to talk, but we didn't give them the chance. She gestured toward a black SUV pulling up nearby. "We're taking you to the secure property. It's not safe here anymore." I wanted to argue, to insist on going home, but my hands were shaking too badly to hold my car keys. I let them guide me into the SUV, where Marco was already waiting. "How did they find me?" I asked as we pulled out of the garage. "They've been watching the building, waiting for a moment when you were alone." Marco's expression was grim. This escalation means something changed on their end. Either they're getting desperate, or they received new intelligence. Intelligence about what? About the audit findings. About whatever they think you've discovered. The drive to Christopher's property took longer than usual, Marco taking an indirect route to ensure we weren't followed. By the time we arrived, Christopher was waiting at the entrance, his expression dark with controlled anger. "Are you hurt?" he asked immediately, scanning me for injuries. "I'm fine. Your people got there first. This time." He gestured toward the house. "Come inside. We need to talk about what happens next." I followed him to his study, where Anna was already preparing tea. The normalcy of the gesture, tea and fine china while discussing organized crime, felt surreal. "You're staying here," Christopher said once Anna had left. "It's not negotiable anymore." They attempted direct contact in a location they knew would have minimal witnesses. "Next time, they'll be more aggressive. I can't just move into your property." "Why not? Give me one reason that outweighs your safety." "Because I have a life I'm trying to maintain. Because accepting this makes me dependent on you. Because the longer I stay in your world, the harder it will be to extract myself when this is over." "And if you're dead before it's over, what life will you have then?" The bluntness of the question silenced me. He was right, and we both knew it. I was out of safe options. "The guest house," I said finally. "Separate entrance, like you mentioned. And I continue working on the audit remotely. 2 weeks, like I promised Robert." "Agreed. I'll have Marco collect your essentials from your apartment." "Anything specific you need?" I thought about the hidden pregnancy tests, the prenatal vitamins, the maternity clothes I'd been gradually acquiring. "I'll make a list." Over the next 2 days, I settled into the guest house with a mixture of relief and resignation. Anna stocked the fridge and moved through the space with a quiet efficiency, always knocking before bringing meals and leaving the trays on the small table inside the door, unless I invited her in. On the first afternoon, I misjudged the step down from the foyer into the living room. My balance shifted, the world tilting for a split second. Christopher was suddenly there, his hands closing around my upper arms as he pulled me back against his chest. For one suspended heartbeat, there was nothing between us. No strategically placed laptop bag, no restaurant table, no winter coat. Just the unmistakable curve of my abdomen pressed to him. His fingers tightened, just slightly, then eased as he let me go, his expression smoothing into something neutral and unreadable. He didn't comment, didn't glance down, simply asked if I was all right and stepped back. but the echo of that moment followed me into the quiet of the guest house that night. Christopher maintained respectful distance, though we had dinner together in the main house more often than I'd expected. I always chose the chair that gave me the deepest stretch of table between us, grateful for the linen-draped barrier that hid the lower half of my body. When I stood, I made a habit of keeping something in front of me. A folded napkin, my cardigan, my camera bag when I brought it in from the car, an easy, practiced choreography of misdirection. If he noticed, he never commented. Instead, he steered our conversations toward neutral ground that gradually became less neutral. Food, books, the grind of our respective careers, the strange ways grief had hollowed out our 20s and forced us to navigate adulthood without the guidance we'd expected to have. "You mentioned a sister," Christopher said during the second dinner. "Why aren't you close?" "We had a fight 3 years ago. She got married young, wanted me to be her maid of honor. I couldn't make it because of a crucial work commitment. She said I prioritized career over family, that I was cold and selfish." "And you never reconciled?" "She stopped taking my calls. I stopped trying after a few months. I pushed food around my plate. Maybe she was right. Maybe I am too focused on work. Or maybe you're trying to build something stable after losing your foundation." His dark eyes were understanding. "People grieve differently. Your sister chose connection. You chose achievement. Neither is wrong." The insight surprised me. I'd spent 3 years believing I'd failed Haley, that my choices had been selfish. But Christopher's reframing offered a different perspective. "Do you ever think about reaching out to her again?" he asked. "Sometimes. But what would I say? That I'm sorry for choices I'd probably make again? You could say that you miss her. That you'd like the chance to understand each other better, even if you never fully agree." I looked at him. This man who ran a business empire with connections to organized crime, offering relationship advice with surprising wisdom. "You're more insightful than I expected. People are rarely what we initially expect them to be." That night, lying in the comfortable bed in the guest house, I felt the baby moving and allowed myself to think about Haley. She'd be about to become an aunt, though she didn't know it. Would she be excited? Angry that I'd hidden it? Both? The impulse to call her was strong, but I suppressed it. Too many complications. Too much to explain. After this situation with the O'Sullivans resolved, after I'd delivered the baby and figured out my next steps, then maybe I could reach out. Maybe then I'd have enough stability to risk rejection. The audit work consumed my days. I worked from the guest house, video conferencing with Robert twice a week, and submitting progress reports that documented both the legitimate transactions I'd verified and the irregularities that remained suspicious. The patterns were becoming clearer. Christopher's father had indeed built extensive networks for moving money through art acquisitions and shell companies, but those operations had been gradually scaled back over the past 2 years. Christopher was telling the truth about transitioning toward fully legitimate business. The question was whether that transition would be complete before external pressures forced different choices. On my 6th day at the property, I had my monthly prenatal appointment. I'd arranged it at the same distant clinic, but this time with Marco driving me. He waited in the vehicle while I went inside, keeping watch for any O'Sullivan surveillance. "Doctor, Whitfield was concerned about my elevated stress levels and slightly high blood pressure. You're at 32 weeks now. Everything is progressing normally, but stress this late in pregnancy can trigger early labor. Whatever situations you're dealing with, you need to find ways to manage them." "I'm trying. Are you getting adequate rest? Eating properly? Do you have support systems in place for after the birth?" Support systems. I had none. No family involved. No friends who knew about the pregnancy. No partner. Just a secret I'd carried alone for 8 months, and a plan to disappear before anyone discovered the truth. "I'm working on it," I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. I was working on surviving each day, which was the best I could manage. After the appointment, Marco drove me back to the property. As we pulled through the gates, I saw an unfamiliar car parked near the main house. Christopher stood beside it, speaking with a well-dressed older man I didn't recognize. "Who's that?" I asked Marco. "Legal counsel. Mr. Verciani's been negotiating with the O'Sullivans through intermediaries. Negotiations about what? Territory, terms of truce, how to resolve this conflict without further casualties. I went to the guest house, but an hour later Christopher knocked on the door. "Can we talk?" he asked when I opened it. "Of course." He entered, looking more tired than I'd seen him. "The negotiations aren't going well. The O'Sullivans are demanding concessions I can't make without essentially surrendering control of my business. They want access to my distribution networks, percentage of profits, and oversight of my operations. What happens if you refuse? Escalation, more violence, more risk to everyone associated with me." He met my gaze directly, "Including you. So what are you going to do?" "I'm considering options that would resolve this permanently, but those options have consequences I need to think through carefully." The vagueness of his phrasing told me he was considering something dangerous, something final. "Don't do anything that compromises who you're trying to become," I said quietly. "You told me you're trying to build something legitimate. Don't destroy that goal to solve a temporary problem. The O'Sullivans aren't temporary. They're a permanent threat as long as I operate in this city. Then maybe you need to consider operating somewhere else. Take your legitimate businesses and relocate to territory that isn't contested." He looked at me with surprise. "You're suggesting I run?" "I'm suggesting you make strategic choices that align with your stated goals. You want to transition to fully legitimate operations. That's easier in a location where you're not constantly fighting territorial disputes with criminal organizations." Christopher was quiet for a long moment. "That's actually not a terrible idea. Several of my wine suppliers are based in California. I could establish operations there, gradually shift the company's center away from this city." "Would the O'Sullivans let you leave?" "If I conceded this territory and paid exit fees, yes. They don't care about my operations in other states. They only care about control here." "Then that's your answer." He studied me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You have good strategic instincts. Have you ever considered consulting work beyond forensic accounting? I prefer numbers to strategy. Numbers are clearer, but you're good at seeing patterns in complex situations. That's valuable." Before I could respond, my phone rang. "Robert. Olivia, we have a problem. The FBI just contacted the firm. They want to interview you about the Verciani audit." My stomach dropped. "When?" "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. at their field office." Robert's voice carried stress. "They specifically requested you. Something about information you've documented that's relevant to an ongoing investigation. I'll be there." After hanging up, I looked at Christopher, who had clearly heard the conversation. "The FBI wants to talk to me about your accounts." I expected this. "They've been building a case for months." He didn't look particularly concerned. "Tell them the truth. You've audited my accounts, found both legitimate transactions and irregularities, and documented everything thoroughly. You're a professional doing your job. What if they ask me to testify? Then you testify. I'm not asking you to lie or obstruct justice. Everything in those accounts is defensible or explainable. Some of it might cost me fees and penalties, but nothing that would result in criminal charges. You sound very confident about that, because I've been working with my attorneys for 2 years to ensure compliance. My father's old operations are being dissolved correctly, all taxes and fees paid retroactively. It's expensive and complicated, but it's legal." He stood, preparing to leave. "Answer the FBI's questions honestly. I have nothing to hide from them." After he left, I sat alone in the guest house, one hand resting on my belly where the baby was moving. Tomorrow, I'd be questioned by federal investigators about financial crimes, while hiding a pregnancy that was becoming impossible to conceal under professional clothing. The secret was too big now, the lies too complicated. Something was going to break, and I had no idea how to prevent it. The FBI interview never happened. At 8:30 the next morning, I was in the guest house preparing to leave when violent cramping doubled me over. Not Braxton Hicks. Something worse. Something deeper that radiated from my lower back and wrapped around my abdomen with relentless intensity. I tried to breathe through it, telling myself it would pass. But 15 minutes later, another wave hit, stronger than the first. When I stood, fluid soaked through my clothes. My water had broken. Panic replaced all rational thought. I was 32 weeks pregnant, 6 weeks early. This wasn't supposed to happen yet. I wasn't ready. I had no hospital bag packed, no plan in place, no story prepared for how I'd explain any of this. I managed to reach my phone, calling the only number that made sense. Christopher answered on the second ring. "I need help." My voice came out strained. "Something's wrong." He was at my door within 2 minutes, taking in my condition with immediate assessment. "How long have you been having contractions?" 20 minutes. My water broke. His expression shifted from concern to focused action. "We're going to the hospital. Now." "I can't. People will know. The FBI interview, my job, everything will fall apart." "None of that matters if you're having a medical emergency." He was already calling someone on his phone. "Marco, bring the car to the guest house. Medical emergency. We're going to St. Catherine's." "Christopher, you don't understand." "I understand that you're in labor weeks early and need immediate medical attention." He ended the call and crouched beside where I sat on the couch. "Whatever you've been hiding, whatever complications you're worried about, they're secondary to your health right now." Another contraction hit, and I couldn't hold back a cry of pain. Christopher's hand found mine, his grip steady. "I'm 32 weeks pregnant," I gasped out. "I've been hiding it for months. From everyone. The baby isn't yours. It's from a stranger I met at a conference. I was planning to disappear before anyone found out." He didn't look shocked. Instead, something like understanding crossed his features. "I know. You know? I figured it out the week you moved into the guest house," he said quietly. "You almost fell in the foyer, remember? I caught you, and for a second there was nothing between us. No coat, no table, no carefully placed bag. Just you." Another contraction ripped through me. I squeezed his hand, breath shaking. "So you guessed." "I stopped guessing when I saw the prenatal vitamins in your bathroom and the appointments on your billing statements," he went on, his voice steady even as mine frayed. "Your trash, the pharmacy receipts, the way you've been hiding your body. I'm observant, Olivia. I put it together." The betrayal of his silence warred with the panic clawing up my throat. "You knew and didn't say anything?" His grip tightened around my fingers, not enough to hurt, just enough to anchor. "Because you were already terrified," he said. "You were waiting for the floor to drop out from under you every time the phone rang. Cornering you about something this big when you didn't feel safe here yet would have been pressure, not protection." Another contraction built, hot and sharp. Tears pricked my eyes, half from pain, half from something dangerously close to relief. "So you just watched?" I managed. "I waited," he corrected. "I made sure no one got near you. I thought that when you were ready, you'd tell me. And if you didn't," his jaw set, "I'd still keep you alive." His gaze flicked to Anna. "Right now, the only thing that matters is getting you and the baby to a hospital." The betrayal of his silence warred with my current crisis. "You knew and didn't say anything?" "Because I understood you had reasons for keeping the secret. I was waiting for you to trust me with the truth." He helped me stand as Marco pulled up outside. "Right now, the only thing that matters is getting you proper medical care." The drive to St. Catherine's Hospital took 12 minutes that felt like hours. Contractions came every 8 minutes, each one stealing my breath. Marco drove with practiced efficiency while Christopher sat beside me in the back seat, his hand never leaving mine. "My doctor is at a clinic across town," I managed between contractions. "Dr. Sarah Whitfield. We'll have her paged once you're admitted." Christopher's voice was calm, grounding. "Focus on breathing. In through your nose, out through your mouth." The emergency entrance at St. Catherine's was designed for efficiency. A wheelchair appeared immediately, and I was rushed through triage while Christopher handled paperwork with an authority that suggested he'd done this before. A nurse in navy scrubs checked my vitals while asking rapid questions. "How far along are you?" 32 weeks. "Any complications during pregnancy?" "High blood pressure, gestational diabetes." Blood pressure was slightly elevated at my last appointment. "Stress-related." She made notes, then looked up at Christopher. "Are you the father?" "No," I said, before he could answer. "He's a friend. The father's not in the picture," Christopher added smoothly. "I'm here as her support person." Within 20 minutes, I was in a private room being examined by an obstetrician I'd never met. Dr. Patricia Williams was in her 50s, efficient and reassuring. Your cervix is dilating, but slowly. The baby's heart rate is strong, which is good. We're going to try to slow or stop the labor with medication, give you steroid shots to help develop the baby's lungs in case we can't stop it. 32 weeks is early, but with proper care, outcomes are generally positive. The baby will be okay. Premature babies face challenges, but we have an excellent NICU here. Let's focus on trying to keep this pregnancy going a few more weeks if possible. The next 6 hours blurred together. Medication through an IV, monitoring equipment tracking every contraction, nurses checking constantly. Christopher remained throughout, sitting in the chair beside my bed, making calls to postpone meetings and arrange for my belongings to be brought from the guest house. You should go, I told him during a quiet moment. You have the FBI situation to handle, your business negotiations. Marco is handling the FBI. They've agreed to reschedule your interview. As for the business, nothing is more important than making sure you're okay. Why are you doing this? You barely know me. He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully, because in the past months of working together, I've come to care what happens to you. Because you deserve to have someone here who gives a damn whether you're alone and scared. And because maybe I'm tired of being the person who only knows how to operate in crisis mode. Maybe I want to be someone who can just be present for another human being without calculation or ulterior motive. The honesty in his voice undid something in me. I should have told you. About the pregnancy. About why I was really so afraid of the O'Sullivan situation. You told me when you were ready. That's what matters. Around 4 p.m, the contractions began to slow. The medication was working. Dr. Williams returned with cautiously optimistic news. The labor appears to be stopping. We'll keep you overnight for observation, continue the steroid treatments, and monitor closely. If you can make it another few days without active labor, we'll reassess. Ideally, we'd like to get you to 34 weeks minimum. What do I need to do? Complete bed rest. No stress, no physical exertion. You'll need someone monitoring you constantly in case labor restarts suddenly. She'll stay at my property, Christopher said. Private nursing care, whatever equipment or monitoring is needed. I'll arrange everything. Dr. Williams looked between us. That's very generous. Miss Grant, are you comfortable with this arrangement? I thought about my alternatives. Returning to my apartment alone with O'Sullivan's people still searching for me. Trying to manage bed rest while maintaining my job and keeping the pregnancy secret. The FBI interview that would eventually happen. All of it impossible to navigate without support. Yes, I said. I'm comfortable with it. After Dr. Williams left, I turned to Christopher. This is going to complicate everything. Your negotiations, the audit, the whole situation. The situation was already complicated. This just adds different variables. He stood, moving to the window. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're not facing this alone anymore. Even though the baby isn't yours, even though I lied for months, the baby being mine or not is irrelevant to whether you deserve support and protection. As for the lying, you did what you felt necessary to survive. I understand survival choices better than most people. That evening, Christopher left briefly to handle business while I ate bland hospital food and tried to process everything. The secret was out. At least to him. Soon it would spread further. Medical records, insurance claims. Eventually everyone would know. My phone had 17 missed calls. The FBI, Robert. Even a few numbers I didn't recognize. I couldn't deal with any of it. Around 8, Christopher returned with Anna, who carried an overnight bag she'd packed from the guest house. I brought comfortable clothes and your laptop, Anna said kindly. And some books I thought you might like. Hospital stays are terribly boring. Thank you. You didn't have to come all this way. Nonsense. We take care of our own. She patted my hand gently before leaving. Our own? I asked Christopher after she'd gone. Anna considers anyone staying at the property under her care. She's fiercely protective of people she decides to adopt. That night, Christopher slept in the chair beside my bed, despite my protests that he should go home. Every few hours, nurses came to check my vitals and the baby's heartbeat. Each time, he'd wake, watch the monitoring carefully, then settle back once assured everything was stable. In the quiet darkness between checks, I finally let myself cry, for the months of carrying this secret alone, for the fear that I'd fail at the one thing I absolutely couldn't afford to fail at, keeping this baby safe, for the relief of having someone present who actually seemed to care beyond obligation. Christopher heard the quiet sobs and moved from the chair to sit carefully on the edge of the bed. He didn't offer empty platitudes or tell me everything would be fine. He just sat there, solid and present, until the crying stopped and exhaustion pulled me into sleep. The next morning, Dr. Williams cleared me for discharge with strict instructions. Complete bed rest, follow-up appointments twice weekly, immediate return to the hospital if contractions resumed. Christopher had already arranged for a private nurse to stay at the property and medical equipment to be delivered. "You've thought of everything," I said as we prepared to leave. "I'm good at logistics. It's one of my more useful skills." During the drive back to the property, I finally checked my messages. Robert had called 4 times, increasingly worried. The FBI had rescheduled my interview for next week, and there was one message from a number I hadn't seen in 3 years. "Haley. Olivia, it's me. I heard through a mutual friend that you were in the hospital. Are you okay? Please call me back. I know we haven't talked, but I've been thinking about you. I want to fix this between us. Please." I stared at the message, emotions swirling. My sister had somehow heard about the hospital visit, which meant other people knew too. The secret was unraveling faster than I'd anticipated. "Bad news?" Christopher asked, noticing my expression. "My sister. We haven't spoken in 3 years. She wants to reconnect. That's not necessarily bad. It is when I don't know how to explain any of this to her. When the last time we spoke, she called me cold and selfish for prioritizing work over family. And now you're having a baby alone, hiding it from everyone, working for someone connected to organized crime while being hunted by rivals." He glanced at me briefly. "Maybe she'd understand better than you think. People change in 3 years. Maybe both of you have." The thought of reconnecting with Haley, of having family who actually knew what was happening in my life, was both terrifying and tempting. But that was a complication for another day. Right now, I needed to focus on the most important thing, keeping this pregnancy stable for at least 2 more weeks. Everything else, the FBI, the audit, the O'Sullivans, even my fractured relationship with my sister, would have to wait. 2 days passed in careful stillness. I stayed in bed at the guest house while a nurse named Patricia monitored my vitals every 4 hours. No more contractions. The baby's heartbeat remained strong. Dr. Williams called daily with cautiously optimistic updates. Christopher divided his time between his study and checking on me, always knocking before entering, always respecting the boundaries, even though we both knew those boundaries had shifted fundamentally when he'd held my hand through contractions. On the 3rd evening, he arrived with his laptop and a determined expression. "We need to talk about what happens next," he said, settling into the chair beside my bed. "The FBI interview is in 4 days. The O'Sullivan negotiations are stalled, and your medical situation requires ongoing care that's expensive and complicated. I'm aware of all that. So here's what I'm proposing. A negotiation between us. Clear terms that address everyone's interests." I shifted carefully against the pillows. "What kind of negotiation?" "First, the audit. I want you to complete it honestly. Document everything you've found. The legitimate operations, the problematic transactions, all of it. But I also want your recommendation about whether what you've found constitutes criminal activity or simply poor record-keeping that's being corrected. You want me to editorialize my findings. I want your professional opinion as part of the report. That's standard practice for forensic accounting." He was right, though it felt uncomfortable given our changed relationship. "What else?" "The FBI interview. You'll tell them the truth about what you found. I'm not asking you to lie or obstruct, but I want you to emphasize that I've been cooperative, that I'm actively transitioning away from questionable operations, and that the irregularities you've documented are being addressed through proper channels. Again, you want me to frame things favorably. I want you to be honest while acknowledging context. There's a difference between a criminal actively engaged in illegal operations and someone unwinding inherited complications. I considered this. And what do I get in return for these favorable framings? Medical care. For the remainder of your pregnancy and after the birth. private doctors, whatever specialist you need. I'll cover all expenses, no insurance claims that leave paper trails. You maintain your privacy while getting excellent care. That's not negotiation, that's charity. Then let's call it compensation for the stress my business has caused you. The O'Sullivan situation put you in danger. This is me making that right. There's more, isn't there? You're building toward something bigger. A faint smile crossed his features. You really do see patterns well. Yes, there's more. I'm relocating the primary operations to California. I'll be gone within 2 months, which resolves the territorial dispute with the O'Sullivans. They keep this city, I keep my businesses elsewhere. That's smart, strategic withdrawal, which leaves the question of what happens to you. You can stay here, return to your apartment, go wherever you choose, but I'd like to make you an offer. My heart rate picked up slightly. What kind of offer? Come to California, not as my employee, but as a consultant. Help me build the transition to fully legitimate operations. You're good at identifying financial structures that need correction. I need someone with that skill who I actually trust. You barely know me. I know that you risked your career to maintain ethical standards during the audit. I know you've been managing an impossible situation with remarkable composure. I know you're smart, principled, and exactly the kind of person I need if I'm serious about going legitimate. And the baby? The baby is part of the offer. Medical care continues, obviously. But also, I'll make sure you have support. Childcare when you're working, proper maternity leave, whatever you need to manage both motherhood and career. It was too generous, which made me suspicious. Why would you do all this? Christopher was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. Because in the past months, you've become someone I care about. Because I'm tired of operating in the shadows, making moral compromises, constantly looking over my shoulder. You represent something different. Integrity without naivety, strength without cruelty. Working with you makes me want to be better than I've been. That's a lot of weight to put on one person. Then tell me what you want instead. Tell me what would make this situation work for you, and I'll try to accommodate it. What did I want? I'd spent so long focused on surviving alone that I'd forgotten how to articulate needs beyond immediate crisis management. I want honesty, I said finally. Complete transparency about your business operations. No more surprises about criminal connections or dangerous rivals. If I'm going to work with you, I need to know exactly what I'm getting into. Agreed. I want autonomy. Not just the illusion of choice, but actual control over my decisions. Where I live, how I work, how I raise my child. You can offer support, but you can't dictate terms. Reasonable. What else? I want you to help me reconnect with my sister. I don't know how to bridge that gap on my own, and you were right that I shouldn't face this alone anymore. If Haley's willing to talk, I want to try to fix what broke between us. Christopher nodded. I can facilitate that. Anything else? Yes. I want to know what you actually feel for me beyond professional respect. Because the way you've been looking at me suggests this isn't purely a business arrangement in your mind. He'd been leaning forward slightly in the chair. Now he sat back, processing the direct question. You're right. It's not purely professional. I've developed feelings I didn't anticipate and don't entirely know how to navigate. But I'm not going to pressure you about that while you're vulnerable, medically compromised, and facing multiple crises. Whatever happens between us romantically, if anything, needs to be your choice made from a position of stability. That's very measured and careful. I'm trying to do this right. To not be the person who takes advantage of someone's difficult circumstances. I studied his face in the soft lamplight. He looked tired, the controlled facade showing cracks. What if I told you that despite everything logical that says this is a terrible idea, I've developed feelings too? What would you do with that information? I'd ask if you're sure those feelings are real, or if they're gratitude mixed with proximity and stress. I'd say I've spent 7.5 months analyzing my own emotions obsessively, and I'm fairly certain I can tell the difference between gratitude and actual attraction. Something shifted in his expression. Then I'd say we should table that conversation until after you've delivered safely, recovered physically, and had time to process everything that's happened. And if you still feel that way when you're not under siege from multiple directions, we'll explore what it might mean. That's frustratingly reasonable. I'm trying to be worthy of whatever trust you're placing in me. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Haley again. I'd been avoiding her calls for 3 days, not knowing what to say. Answer it, Christopher said quietly. Start rebuilding what you can. I picked up the phone, heart hammering. Haley? Olivia? Thank God. I've been so worried. Mom's friend's daughter works at St. Catherine's and mentioned seeing your name in the system. Are you okay? What happened? I'm okay now. There was a medical situation, but it's resolved. What kind of medical situation? Olivia, talk to me. I know we've been apart for years, but you're still my sister. Christopher made a small gesture offering to leave, but I shook my head. Whatever I said to Haley, he should hear. I'm pregnant, I said quietly. 7.5 months. I've been hiding it from everyone. I went into early labor, but they stopped it with medication. I'm on bed rest now. Silence on the other end. Then, you're pregnant? And you didn't tell me? I'm going to be an aunt and you were just going to what? Let me find out through hospital gossip? I didn't tell anyone. It's complicated. Where's the father? Is he taking care of you? There is no father in the picture. It was a conference hookup with someone whose name I can't remember. I was planning to handle this alone. Alone? Olivia, you can't have a baby alone. You need support, family, help. I'm figuring that out now. Someone's been helping me. Who? Where are you? I looked at Christopher, who nodded slightly. I'm staying at a property owned by a client. It's secure. I have medical care. It's safe. A client? What kind of client has you living at his property? Haley's voice carried suspicion. Olivia, what's actually going on? It's a very long story involving forensic accounting, organized crime, and a lot of bad decisions. Organized crime? I said it was complicated. Haley was quiet for a moment. I'm coming to see you. Tell me where you are. I'll drive there tonight. Haley, it's late, and you live 2 hours away. I'm not asking. You're pregnant. You went into early labor, and you're apparently hiding from organized crime at some client's house. I'm your sister. I'm coming. Now give me the address. I looked at Christopher again. Can she visit? Of course. Marco will pick her up if she'd rather not drive in the dark. Whatever makes this easier. I relayed that information to Haley, who reluctantly agreed to let Marco collect her from her house. After we hung up, I realized I was crying. That went better than you expected, Christopher observed. She didn't tell me I was selfish for how I'd handled things. She just immediately wanted to help. People surprise us, sometimes in good ways. 2 hours later, Haley arrived. She was exactly as I remembered. Blonde hair, green eyes like mine, but shorter and rounder, where I'd always been taller and more angular. She came straight to my bedside and hugged me carefully, mindful of my condition. You look terrible, she said, which somehow felt more loving than criticism. I'm on bed rest. I'm not supposed to look good. When did you get so thin? Except for the belly, you're all bones. Stress diet. It's very effective. She sat in the chair Christopher had vacated, looking at me with concern mixed with residual hurt from our years of silence. Tell me everything, from the beginning. So I did. The conference, the pregnancy, hiding it, the audit that led to Christopher, the O'Sullivans, all of it. She listened without interruption, her expression cycling through shock, anger, concern, and finally a kind of resigned understanding. You always made everything harder than it needed to be, she said when I'd finished. You could have called me 8 months ago. I would have helped. Would you? After the things you said about me prioritizing work over family, I was hurt and angry. I said things I didn't mean. But Olivia, you're my sister. No matter how mad I was, I would have been there if you'd asked. I didn't know how to ask. Well, I'm here now, and I'm not leaving until we figure this out properly. Christopher reappeared with Anna, who'd prepared a late meal. The 4 of us sat in the guest house living area, while Haley interrogated Christopher about his intentions, his business, and his plans for keeping me safe. He answered with remarkable patience, never defensive, always honest about the complications while emphasizing his commitment to legitimate operations. Finally, Haley turned to me. Do you trust him? Yes. Surprisingly, I do. And you want to go to California, work with him, build something there? I think so. If I can finish this FBI interview without compromising either my ethics or his safety, then I'll support that. But I'm also going to visit regularly, and if anything feels wrong, I expect you to tell me immediately. It was more than I'd dared hope for. Family, rebuilt on foundations of honesty rather than hidden secrets. That night, after Haley had been settled in a guest room in the main house, Christopher returned to check on me one final time. "Thank you," I said. "For tonight, for Haley, for all of it. You deserve to have family present. Everyone does. The FBI interview is in 2 days. Are you ready for whatever I'll tell them? I've been ready for months. Tell them the truth, Olivia. Whatever happens, we'll handle it together." The certainty in his voice made me believe it was possible. The FBI interview was conducted via video conference from Christopher's study, given my medical restrictions. 2 agents appeared on screen, a woman in her 40s named Special Agent Reeves and her younger male partner, Agent Park. They were professional but not hostile, which I took as a good sign. "Miss Grant, thank you for making time despite your health situation," Agent Reeves began. "We understand you've been conducting a forensic audit of Christopher Versiani's business operations for the past several months." "That's correct. Can you describe what you found?" I'd prepared for this extensively with my attorney present, making sure every statement was accurate and defensible. Mr. Versiani's operations consist primarily of legitimate import businesses focused on Italian wines, artisan foods, furniture, and art. However, I identified irregularities in financial structures that suggested previous involvement in money laundering through art acquisitions, valued above market rates and payments to shell companies in tax havens. Previous involvement? The problematic transactions were concentrated in the period before Mr. Versiani assumed control of the business 3 years ago. Since then, there's been a measurable reduction in questionable activities, with clear evidence of transition toward fully compliant operations. Agent Reeves made notes. "Did Mr. Versiani cooperate with your audit?" "Extensively. He provided full access to all accounts, answered questions thoroughly, and was transparent about the inherited complications from his father's management. We understand you're currently residing at one of Mr. Versiani's properties. Doesn't that compromise your objectivity?" "I'm residing there because my apartment became unsafe due to harassment from a rival organization called the O'Sullivan family, who were attempting to access my audit findings through intimidation and potential kidnapping. Mr. Versiani provided security as a direct result of dangers created by my professional work for his account." Agent Park spoke for the first time. "Tell us about the O'Sullivans." I detailed what I knew about the territorial conflict, the surveillance I'd experienced, the parking garage confrontation. Both agents listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Are you aware of any criminal activities Mr. Versiani is currently engaged in?" Agent Reeves asked. "No. Based on my extensive review of financial records, his current operations appear to be legitimate business activities being conducted in compliance with applicable laws and regulations." "But you found evidence of previous criminal activity." "I found evidence of financial irregularities that could be interpreted as money laundering from the period before Mr. Versiani's control. Those operations are being systematically dissolved with proper legal oversight." The interview continued for 2 hours, covering every aspect of the audit. I answered honestly, but emphasized context Christopher had asked me to include. The agents seemed satisfied, though they indicated the investigation would continue. After they signed off, my attorney nodded approvingly. "You did well. Truthful but not damaging." That's exactly what was needed. Christopher had listened from another room. When he entered afterward, his expression was carefully controlled. "Thank you for being fair in your characterization. I told the truth. You've been transparent with me throughout this process. What happens now? I complete the final audit report, you move operations to California, and we both hope the FBI concludes their investigation without charges. That afternoon, I finalized the audit report. It was comprehensive, professional, and documented both the irregularities I'd found and the evidence of transition toward legitimate operations. Robert received it with obvious relief, immediately forwarding it to the firm's partners. "This is excellent work, Olivia," he said during our call. "Fair, thorough, well documented. Given the circumstances, I think it's best if you take extended leave. Medical leave for the pregnancy, Then we'll reassess your position afterward. Translation: they wanted distance from the complicated situation. I'd expected nothing less. That's acceptable, I said. I'll submit my formal leave request today. Christopher's negotiations with the O'Sullivans reached conclusion 2 days later. He conceded this city's territory, paid substantial exit fees, and agreed to relocate his primary operations to California within 60 days. In exchange, the harassment stopped immediately. Marco confirmed that surveillance on me had been withdrawn, and the threat level downgraded to minimal. It's over, Christopher told me that evening. The conflict, the immediate danger, all of it resolved. At significant cost to you. Territory is just geography. I kept what matters: the actual businesses, my people, and the ability to operate without constant warfare. He paused. Plus, California has excellent weather, which seems important given you'll have a newborn. You're assuming I'm definitely coming with you. I'm hoping, but I understand if you choose differently. I'd been thinking about that choice for days. California represented a fresh start, away from the complicated history here. Working with Christopher meant financial stability and interesting challenges. But it also meant tangling my life with his permanently, committing to a path I couldn't easily reverse. The decision became clearer a week later when I went into labor again. This time, at exactly 34 weeks, the doctors couldn't stop it. Christopher drove me to St. Catharines at 2 a.m, Haley meeting us there within an hour, despite the distance. The labor progressed quickly. By dawn, I was holding my daughter, Clara, who weighed 5 pounds 3 ounces, and had a set of lungs that announced her displeasure at the early arrival. She was small but healthy, breathing on her own after the steroid treatments had helped develop her lungs. She's perfect, Haley said, tears streaming down her face. Olivia, she's absolutely perfect. Christopher stood slightly apart, giving me space with my sister and daughter. But when I looked up and gestured him closer, he approached cautiously. Would you like to hold her? I asked. Are you sure? I'm sure. He took Clara carefully, supporting her head with practiced ease that suggested he'd held babies before. She settled against his chest, and something in his expression softened completely. Hello, Clara, he said quietly. Welcome to the world. You're going to have an interesting life. She yawned, entirely unimpressed by the momentous nature of her birth. The next few days blurred together in the controlled chaos of new motherhood. Clara had to stay in the hospital for additional monitoring, being premature. I stayed with her, sleeping in a chair beside her isolette, learning to nurse and change diapers and interpret her different cries. Christopher and Haley took turns keeping me company, bringing food and fresh clothes, handling the logistics I couldn't manage while focused entirely on my daughter. My sister had taken personal leave from her teaching job to be present, and her support was invaluable. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you before, she said one afternoon while Clara slept. When you needed family, I let pride keep me away. I'm sorry I chose work over being your maid of honor. You were right that I prioritized career too much. We were both right and both wrong. Can we agree to do better going forward? Yes. Definitely yes. A week after Clara's birth, Dr. Williams cleared us for discharge. Clara had gained weight, was feeding well, and showing all the right developmental markers despite her early arrival. I was exhausted but healing properly. Christopher appeared with a car seat already installed in his vehicle and a surprising amount of baby supplies in the trunk. I might have ordered some things, he admitted when I raised an eyebrow at the quantity. Some things? This is enough for twins. I wanted to make sure you had everything you needed. Back at the property, Anna had transformed a room in the main house into a nursery. Soft yellow walls, a crib with organic cotton bedding, a rocking chair positioned near the window, and more baby equipment than I could identify. This is too much, I protested weakly. It's exactly right, Anna said firmly. Every baby deserves to come home to a proper nursery. That night, after Clara had been fed and changed and was sleeping in her bassinet beside my bed in the guest house, I finally had space to think about everything that had happened. In 3 months, I'd gone from hiding a pregnancy while conducting a dangerous audit to being a mother with family support and a genuine partnership with someone I'd grown to care about deeply. Christopher knocked softly and entered when I called out. "How are you managing?" "I'm terrified and exhausted and have no idea what I'm doing. But Clara's healthy, and that's what matters." He sat in the chair near the bassinet, looking at the sleeping baby. "I meant what I said about California. The offer stands, whatever you decide. Consulting work, medical care, support with childcare. I want you there, Olivia. Not just professionally, but because I've become invested in your life and Clara's. You barely know her. I know she's determined, loud when she wants something, and has inherited your habit of looking at people like she's assessing their competence. That's already enough to be invested." I laughed quietly, not wanting to wake Clara. "What about romantically? You said we'd revisit that conversation when I was stable. Is this stable? Probably as stable as my life gets." He moved to sit on the edge of the bed, careful not to jostle me. "Then here's what I want. I want to build something real with you. Relationship that isn't based on crisis or necessity, but on genuine connection. I want to watch Clara grow up and be part of her life, not as her father, but as someone who cares about both of you. I want to wake up in the morning and know that the person I'm building a business and a life with is someone I admire, trust, and love." "Love? I'm in love with you, Olivia. It happened somewhere between your stubborn insistence on completing that audit ethically and the way you've handled impossible circumstances with courage I didn't expect. I'm not asking you to love me back right now. I'm just telling you the truth about where I am." I reached for his hand. "I do love you. It's terrifying and inconvenient and completely illogical given everything. But I do." He leaned forward and kissed me gently, carefully, mindful of my recent delivery and exhaustion. "So California?" he asked when we separated. "California. Fresh start, legitimate business, partnership in every sense. Let's build something worth having." 6 months later, I stood in the living room of a house in Northern California, watching Christopher and Haley assemble a toy kitchen that Clara was still too young to use. My sister visited monthly now, flying out to spend long weekends with her niece. The consulting work I'd taken on was challenging and engaging, helping Christopher and several other clients transition toward fully transparent operations. Clara babbled from her playmat, reaching for toys and demonstrating the determined personality we'd already come to know well. She was thriving, hitting all her developmental milestones despite the premature birth. The FBI had closed their investigation into Christopher's operations 3 months ago, finding insufficient evidence of ongoing criminal activity. The transition to California had been successful, with legitimate import businesses growing steadily. Christopher entered from the kitchen, carrying coffee. He kissed me briefly before sitting beside Clara, who immediately grabbed for his watch. "Your daughter has expensive taste," he observed. "Our daughter," I corrected. "You've been more of a parent than her biological father ever was or will be. Then our daughter definitely has expensive taste." Haley looked up from the instruction manual. "Are you two ever going to make this official? Because Clara deserves to be flower girl at a wedding eventually." Christopher and I exchanged glances. "Eventually," we said in unison. But eventually felt less important than now. This moment of family built from unlikely circumstances and conscious choices. I'd spent so long hiding, protecting secrets, operating alone, learning to trust, to accept help. To build something with another person had been harder than any audit I'd ever conducted. But watching Clara laugh as Christopher made faces at her, seeing Haley contentedly assembling furniture, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges we'd face together, I understood that some things were worth the risk of opening up. Numbers had taught me about patterns and truth. People had taught me about love and family. And Clara, tiny determined Clara, had taught me that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when all your careful plans fall apart.